Hi, my name is Dion, and this is the Bullion Vault. Hi, Willem, how you doing?
Good news, Dion.
Very good. So today is episode 23, and we're going to be looking at one of the PGMs, which is platinum group metal, specifically rhodium. But we also will tie that into platinum. But I just wanted to just do a quick market roundup where we are. With gold, it's back up, it's nice and strong. What's your thoughts about that?
I actually read an article earlier today about JP Morgan that has once again revised their outlook. I think it's sitting at 3,675 for the final quarter of the year now. That's their outlook. And it has actually got them asking the question, is 4,000 possible? So, yeah, we've seen a few pullbacks, we've seen a few dips in the price, especially when it hits those big peaks, the big highs, and this profit taking, and um, we get those pullbacks, but it's still consistently going up. As you said, it's back up to 3,380, I think, somewhere around there, almost touching 3,400 again.
Again, it speaks to the underlying thing here that the world is not in a good place with geopolitical issues, and then also economically. I know last week the US had released their GDP versus debt ratios, and how that is affecting their markets and so on. And it wasn't great. I mean, there's been big concern in the States. I mean, we know that a lot of these tariff increases or tariff embargoes that Trump has instituted across the board, it has affected a lot of America, not the world itself, but America them as well.
Yeah, the thing to remember is that America, as big and powerful as it is, as mighty as it is, its economy is still just one country, and there are over 100 others to choose from. So America imposes tariffs. Canada says, okay, well, then we'll sell to somebody else. And China's knocking on the door going, us, please.
Yeah, and again, we look at with the where everything's being positioned, and the markets are still not indicating that we through this possible recession depression. I know within South Africa, we've now gone through two quarters where we've been down, so that is effectively is an official recession. They're not saying it. Of course, there's a lot of jumping up and down on how South Africa's doing, but at the end of the day, I mean, and this was something I read also recently, is what we were looking at in 2020 was that whole fiscal cliff and a possible sovereign default. That's coming creeping back in, and it's becoming more real that we haven't dealt with the underlying issues of massive reform, which was always required.
And another problem was it was easy to buy our way out of it by taking on more loans and more loans and more loans. And, at some point, those loans need to be repaid. And I think the time has come for those loans to start getting repaid. And, it's a bit of a problem suddenly. Well, that's why SARS is desperate for income. That's why they're desperate to push through an extra percent on that, and or what was it, 2% originally, and that the government is desperate for money because they know, it's not coming in. It's not looking great, and we're gonna have a problem.
Yeah, we speak of that, and with growth rate being released last week also, that we are literally on a 0% growth rate right now. In other words, the government's in massive trouble as far as what their revenue is supposed to be bringing in. It's diminished to such a level that, yeah, as you say, they cannot be repaying loans or interest on those loans. And again, we always say this is a sovereign default is where the country or the institution is unable to actually service the interest on those loans. And hence that then is a default. And of course, with the country, it's a sovereign default.
Definitely, and another problem is, of course, the tariffs. I mean, what is it? 25% on all imported cars. And as we said before, car manufacturing is one of our biggest industries in South Africa. And suddenly there's a massive dip in that. So we are looking at a few problems because of those tariffs. The AGOA agreement is still up in the air. We don't know what's going to happen, and it might even it's going to hit us a lot harder if that gets rescinded.
And again, that's for us to wait and see, because we know that it's on the cards, it's up for renewal. And of course, Cyril went there and sat in the Oval Office with
With
his,
his two pro golfers next to him and
yeah,
his billionaire buddy, yes.
yeah, and his white Minister of Agriculture, and he painted the right picture. Of course, he had Julius jumping up and down on the big screen in the Oval Office there, and Kilabur and all of that. And of course, Donald Trump was very clear about, then why don't you arrest that man? And of course, it is a question. But again, I mean, we're not going to solve the politics of this country, but these are the issues. Even what's interesting, and we're going to be talking about platinum and rhodium, and South Africa is the top producer in both of those categories within PGMs. However, the thing that's always highlighted as a risk is South Africa and labor union issues. And I mean, this is internationally known.
Definitely. I mean, another issue that we still do have and are still struggling with is, of course, electricity. I mean, as we said, the lights are staying on at the moment, but mining industry takes a heck of a lot of electricity, and there is the worry that the grid might just collapse under too much strain, and investors are very wary of that.
Yeah, and it was actually released yesterday, or I think it was early today, where they were already saying that we will probably have some form of load shedding coming back. Of course, we're in the midst of the winter, so things are cold, everything's got heaters on and air conditioners. So yes, the demand for power, never mind an industrial demand, which, as you say, is massive in comparison.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot being asked from the grid at the moment, and it's keeping up so far. We'll have to see how that goes, but it is a problem. It is something that is hampering growth within South Africa, within industry, and our economical growth overall.
Yeah, and again, these are institutional fundamental issues that are not being dealt with. Is we've got to come to some form, to start realizing that we need to have more power. I remember seeing it a while ago where we, as an African country, are one of the smallest countries spending on energy growth development right now on the continent. That there are countries that are putting far bigger amounts of money into their need and growth for energy, that they've got a number of big energy projects, from solar, your clean energy, all the way through to coal and even nuclear. And yet South Africa, we as have probably the best infrastructure, or we always have had the best infrastructure, and yet we still coming battling to get to to terms with the basic things like decent water supply, energy supply, and of course we've got a lot of foreigners coming into the country, which causes a lot of xenophobia, which causes a whole lot of issues. But we've got mass migration to the cities, away from the rural areas. So again, this big load on the small energy supply, which was originally geared up for a far smaller amount of people than the people it's currently servicing.
It was, yes. I mean, if we look at it back, let's just go back to 1994, before the fall of the white regime and the new democracy was born. Energy or electricity was supplied to the white minority, and that was the people who were getting serviced by ESCOM or whatever it was called. And suddenly now you have millions upon millions more people that are requiring energy. It's not just that little group anymore. Now it is much larger groups, many more people. They're all requiring electricity, and the grid was never built or designed to actually be able to supply it to that many, because it was never conceived that it was necessary to supply it to that many. And that's one of the problems. And I don't think it was addressed correctly when they started rolling it out. It was just sort of thrown together, patchwork, that'll do for now, and for now became forever.
And again, I know that is one of the fundamental reasons why we have got a power issue, but If you look how long we've had our democracy, the post-apartheid regime, the new democratic government, which is not new. I mean, we're now 2 decades plus into it,
I think it's
and
3 decades because we're
yes,
talking 1994. That is
excuse
that
me,
is
it's three,
that
it's
is
three,
31 years ago.
yeah, 3 decades into it, and this is the thing, is we've had some very poor presidents, and I mean the whole Zuma terms. I personally believe has set this country backward in ways we don't even we're still battling to come to terms with how he extorted institutions for his own gain and all of his friends, and that again is part of the issues. This the serial what's it entrepreneurs or tenderpreneurs, where people are coming in, and it's a problem. Yes, there are small people making money from this, but it's not growing the system, and also it's not actually doing what it should be doing. And this is where I talk about reform. That if government wants to actually take this seriously, they need to probably partner with private sector and actually promote the use. Let's grow your green energy. Let's get those systems going. Let's look at other energies. But again, this is one of the issues as a country, and it's concerning to me that being one of the biggest economies, yet when it comes to the continent, we are one of the slowest in growth, in actual production of much needed resources, and one of that being electricity.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're getting a little bit off topic here. I mean, there's many issues and many ways that everyone believes they should be tackled. But let's get back to the PGMs, and we're talking about rhodium today, which is, of course, one of the platinum group metals, and it's a very interesting, very useful metal. It's used in electronics, dental work, medicine, jewelry, hydrogen purification, and then, of course, the big one, autocatalytic converters.
Yeah, and what's interesting is with rhodium, and interesting enough, of the PGMs, of course, South Africa is the big producer of platinum and is also the big producer of rhodium. So those two are what we as a country are actually known for. Again, we spoke about strikes and how that does affect the pricing. But what's interesting is right now, rhodium is the most expensive precious metal you can get. As you said, there's a number of industrial applications. Interesting enough, it's got an exceptionally high heat conductivity. So that also, as you mentioned, into autocats, they're now also looking into it for hydrogen with the fuel cells that will be probably be blended in with the platinum. So you then actually have a far, far superior product.
And if we look at rhodium, the reason why it's so expensive, I mean, okay, it's not as expensive as it once was. It's sitting around about $5,000 an ounce at the moment, I think. But I mean, if we look a few years ago, it was sitting at $17,000 an ounce, and it's not just people thought, okay, we can make this expensive. There's reasons for it. For instance, for every 30 tons of or 30 metric tons of rhodium that's mined, we compare that to palladium, which for those 30 tons of rhodium, there's 210 metric tons of palladium mined. There's 190 metric tons of platinum mined and 3,100 metric tons of gold. So that just gives you an illustration of how rare it actually is. And the other problem is it's not actually mined in the normal sense. It's a byproduct of nickel and platinum mining. So there's more expensive processes that go along with it to eventually get that rhodium to the end result.
Yeah, again, you've highlighted a number of things. The fact that it is not mined on its own does make it very expensive because it is a byproduct. Fortunately, with it being mined mainly in the platinum and, as you mentioned, nickel, is definitely with the PGMs. I know, for instance, within our mining, the companies that do the mining, of course, they're harvesting a whole number of byproducts, from gold to silver to all the PGMs, and ultimately they're going after the platinum and as you mentioned, palladium. But all those other metals, and I mean, if I remember, on one of the reefs, which is it's called the UG2, which is a very chrome dense reef. It's black. It's almost a very, very dark, dark. and very abrasive reef. Majority of there, you're looking at about 14 odd minerals and that are actually harvested off that reef it's specifically.
Well, the other thing, of course, is about a third of all rhodium comes from recycling. And once again, we're back to the autocatalytic converters because that's the industry in which most of it is regained from recycling. Other industries, it's not so much recycled from the spent products, but autocatalytic converters is a big supplier of the recycled rhodium. You know, and if we look at that, it's the same thing with platinum. You've got a large portion of it being recycled, and I think a lot of the PGMs actually do that. Electronics, catalytic converters, etc., etc. A large portion of those metals are coming from recycling these days.
Okay, so just on this, and I mean, it's important that we bringing up these other metals because we get asked these questions. Should I be investing in rhodium? And again, you've mentioned a number of the things. I do personally believe with it being involved in the hydrogen growth, and to me, I believe it's a sector that we are only touching the literally the little part of that. I think within the future we're going to experience a lot of growth within the hydrogen fuel cells versus your typical battery cells. So to simplify it, instead of having a battery, you'd have a hydrogen cell and the platinum or the rhodium that's mixed with the platinum would be the conductor, taking that gas from a gas into electricity to the actual electric motor.
It's a good question. Should I be investing? And it's a lot of factors that come into play here. Well, firstly, how big is your appetite for risk? How much are you looking to invest into it? We always say don't put all your eggs in one basket. So don't go throwing the house at rhodium, because as we said a few years ago, it was $17,000. Today it's 5,000. Now that's not a great investment. um,
Yeah, and but again, this is about the diversification. The other thing that also puts rhodium from an investing perspective, that big question mark is its resellability. Unless you have you bought substantial amounts where you could sell it on to an industrial user or a jewelry manufacturer, the likelihood is you're going to hold it for a long time to get that right buyer. So it's not something that you'd buy today and then sell tomorrow. It's not probably as liquid as I would say gold or silver or even platinum. And of the three, gold, silver, and platinum, platinum tends to have to wait for that right buyer, the right pricing before you can actually sell it on. Yet there is demand for it. But again, it's one of those metals that if you are looking at it, of course, there's always the option to buy it in its physical form, but there's also ETFs and so on that you could look at to get some of the benefits of its growth within the market.
Definitely, and I mean there's a few factors that could come into play. Is it going to be used in the green energy and the green movement going forward? Is it going to be a preferred metal over platinum, for instance, in the hydrogen market? Yeah, you're going to wait a while if you bought at 17,000 for it to get back there. But I mean, we always say investing in bullion is not a short-term exercise. We're looking at long terms. We're looking at gold. Gold, hold your silver, and it gives big benefits. I mean, if you bought gold 2 years ago, look at where it's sitting today. That is a massive return on your investment. Silver right now is doing extremely well. It's sitting at $36.80, I think, just touching
Yeah.
on 37. If you look at 2020, it was sitting at $12. Now, I wish I had at that stage had a few million to throw at silver, because it is gone up by two-thirds or to 3 times what it was in 2020. That's 5 years. That's a 200% increase.
And it's not stopping. I think this is the beginning of that growth cycle for silver. We've spoken about it a number of times through the years to clients. When we've given presentations that we are a big supporter and lover of silver because of its accessibility in the markets. It is also as liquid as gold. There's always a buyer, there's always a seller. Yes, in times where it tends to be, it's a little bit harder to sell than gold because of just how dynamic gold's been in its growth over the last couple of years. But the long term still leans towards silver continuing its growth within this commodity boom.
Definitely, and I mean, I've been saying I've been saying since we started doing this podcast, the gold silver ratio is going to close, and it's not going to be because gold gets cheaper.
Yeah, and that's it. Because silver, it has to start to meet it. It's like that elastic band. You pull it, creates the tension, and then it has to draw towards that. And if we look at past performance over the last 50 plus years, silver was always slow to start in that same run with gold, and yet always exceeded it and exceeded it by quite a margin in actual growth.
Yeah, it's silver follows, and then uh or overtakes over exceeds, yeah,
Yeah.
basically. And then the other one, of course, right now is platinum, which is on one heck of a ride.
Yeah, so we spoke a bit about rhodium, and of course, I mentioned platinum. South Africa is the biggest producer of platinum. And yes, we did actually mention it a week or so ago where it had broken $1,000. And now suddenly I think it's sitting at about
Yeah,
$1,260.
it's
Yeah.
$1,260. I mean, that's a 27-ish, 27-28% increase this month.
And that's it. So again, and we have clients that hold platinum, is it's a long play, it's a diversification, it's putting your wealth in a commodity that's not currency based, such as the rand. So it's mitigating some of those losses. I mean, the rand's back to into the high 17s, touching on just short of 18 rand to the dollar. So we know it's sitting there, it's tinkering. We spoke about the issues of South Africa again, and we speak about it a lot because it's concerning. We know that sometimes they say you can't polish SHRT, because it is that what it is, it is. And that's the thing is we got to be real here. We got to also understand that at some point the rand and is showing from past performance has devalued to the dollar consistently around 20% per annum. And that's still going to continue.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like we've got a magic button we can press and suddenly everything is fixed. It's it's going to take work, and there's going to be some rough times before we get to the good times. It's as simple as that. Um, but yeah, I mean, just looking back at platinum, if we just look at it in the broader scheme of things, as we've said before, South Africa is the biggest producer of platinum, and that is concerning for the platinum market because investors aren't generally dumb. They look at things and they see things that are happening, and they know where the source is, and that of course creates uncertainty about the future supply and supply demand. If there's a demand for it and there's a short supply, then we're going to see the prices rising. And right now, there is an increased demand for, firstly, platinum jewelry because gold is so expensive that platinum has actually become the cheaper option at the moment.
Yeah, and just looking at this, I mean, China's EV sales are up 32% year on year in April, and that was a massive push on the actual growth in platinum. And what's interesting there is palladium as prices have actually lagged in comparison to platinum.
Yes, because I mean, platinum is used in the production of EVs, and it as we've said, it's used in the production of autocatalytic converters in internal combustion engine cars, but it's also used in electric vehicles, and they actually need more platinum for an electric vehicle than they're using in an internal combustion engine. So that gives us an increased demand in the AutoCAD sector, not AutoCAD sector, but in the automotive sector, additional to the autocatalytic converter sector that there's an increased demand. Um, and on top of all of that, we've got an increase in jewelry. So all of this raises investor confidence, it raises investor appetite for platinum, and all of those things work together, and that's why we're seeing the price of platinum go up so substantially at the moment.
You're 100% right. I mean, we just look that with the growth in the EV sector, and that it is still continuing to grow. And as you've mentioned, I mean, that demand for platinum, where palladium was very much for AutoCADs, there was that shift back to platinum from palladium because of the difference in price. The palladium price then crashed, and now but also where platinum, as you said, has benefited is its use within the EV sector, and that's definitely where this growth has been coming through.
Definitely. I mean, if you look at the EV market, I think I read somewhere the other day that 84% of all passenger vehicles in Europe, or what was in Poland, I can't remember, one of the European countries, 84% of the sale of all new passenger vehicles were electric vehicles. Now that of course included plug-in hybrids, but I mean it was the hybrids was something like 4% of that. And that is the appetite for electric vehicles at the moment. And of course, with China coming into the game, there's a lot more affordable vehicles available. There's a wider range. So, in the past, it was kind of you can buy a Tesla or you can buy a piece of crap. And now you've actually got a wide variety. You've got BYD, you've got, I mean, I don't even know them all.
To be honest, and what you're raising here is also how the Chinese manufacturers, and we mentioned this in a previous podcast with the automotives on how they just on your normal naturally aspirated motors, engines where there's been a massive influx of Chinese brands into South Africa. And I think it's a common trend throughout the world, where instead of buying your traditional German type vehicle at X amount, you're coming in same features, similar bits and bobs, and actually a good looking vehicle at two-thirds the price of a German vehicle. And that same trend is definitely being for electric. And we've seen that uptake across the globe on electric cars and also your hybrids. And interesting enough, I drove in one the other day and it's quiet. It's like dead quiet. And then suddenly you hit a hill and you hear the motor kick in and that's that power. But again, then you talk about consumption levels on those hybrids is so good that I do see a phasing out of your naturally aspirated vehicles to that eventually we will have hybrid vehicles where you still use fuel, but then you'll still have the electric to a full-on electric vehicle.
No, definitely. They call it the gateway car. It's that gateway to the fully
It
electric.
sounds like vaping and smoking.
um, but yeah, I mean, the electrical vehicles these days, it is a far cry from where it was. I mean, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, to what we have now, and all of these Chinese brands coming in. Yes, you run the risk of losing future value on your car. You run the risk of, I mean, there's so many unknowns because there are unknown brands in sort of South Africa or in Europe and so on. Of course, they're banned in America, but
Good old Donald.
yes, well, but this is and this is the thing I'm saying, or what I was saying before, is America is one economy. It might be the biggest, but it's one economy. And China is very happy to sell to everybody else who wants it. And if you look at the growth of their electric vehicle market, then it's absolutely booming. And with that comes the increased demand for silver, for platinum. And that's I think one of the biggest drivers of the prices of these metals at the moment.
Again, the other thing, especially for silver, is your photovoltaic market, your solar panels. We know that that's been continuously running at a 20% per annum growth cycle. Two biggest users still is Russia, not Russia, is India and China. They're still the two biggest consumers of it, but we've seen that whole sector, even in our own country, solar panels has become normal, whereas 5 years ago, you saw a few of them around. You now see street lights are being powered by them and so on. And it makes sense because it kind of, you can control the power where it needs to be instead of having cables which get torn out, pulled up and taken out and the metal sold for scrap.
It is, and this all is a part of the green movement that we keep talking about. There's this conscious shift, or even unconscious shift, to green technologies, solar power, hydrogen power, wind turbines, etc., etc. And at the heart of all these technologies are precious metals, platinum, silver, and that's the thing. It's all of these countries. I mean, if you look at China, if you look at India, if you look at the air quality of a few years ago, they were looking at this and they went, that's not right. We need to fix this. And they have, especially China, has been driving hard to rectify that pollution caused by basically generating electricity. And that's why there's this massive shift towards solar. Why? And that, of course, with that comes the increased demand for precious metals like silver.
Well, what's interesting is just on that, what I mentioned about April year on year, the growth rate. I mean, that's nearly 5 million vehicles, electric vehicles were created, built, and sold in April.
No, as I was saying, 84% of all new passenger vehicles were electric. And it's actually mind-boggling to the short span of time that this has been happening. We know, of course, that the European Union has said from 2030 all internal combustion engines or the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles will be banned. So, of course, it's going to have to be electric. And, we've always looked at this and thought, but that's such a short time frame. And now we're looking at it and we're going, it's actually not out of whack. It's very doable.
Yeah, again, let's just contextualize that. We just over 5 years to 2030. It's insane. And again, if we see just over the last 3 years of growth, I remember seeing the first electric vehicles and thinking, where the hell are you going to actually charge these things? And suddenly these sites all popping up. You go to the gym, there's a couple of sites there. You go to the shops, there's sites there. And interesting enough, I mean, originally a lot of the dealerships were the people that had the main sites. And like I remember one of the main roads on the western side of Joburg, and I had a client that lived on the out that side, and he had an electric vehicle, and I said to him, "Where the hell do you charge this thing?" And he says, from his house, based on it was on near Krugersdorp. From there right towards Johannesburg, there were more than 26 sites that he could recharge on and at on the and that was then.
Definitely, infrastructure for these things are growing. I mean, that was always one of the biggest concerns I had a few years ago was, where are you going to charge this thing and how are we going to provide electricity? Now that's of course still an issue, is if everybody in South Africa, all what 70 odd million of us suddenly decide we're going electric with our cars, that's going to create a bit of an issue. Um, so that's why getting all of these things sorted out is such a major um, such an important thing at the moment.
And this is also where I bring the hydrogen's case in for that it does warrant it, and we're going to see that sector grow. Is it makes sense that we're a country that doesn't have big resources on electricity infrastructure or severely lacked that infrastructure, that is an alternative. And again, it's recharge times, it's the power to weight ratios, the less battery carrying for the duration and distance that you could actually utilize hydrogen versus a battery.
Definitely, although, lately, if you look at the recharge times on EVs, they've come down so significantly that that's actually becoming a moot point, you know. And the biggest problem I foresee with hydrogen is the infrastructure for hydrogen vehicles. Because, electricity, you've got an electric line going to any garage, any petrol station in the country. There's electricity there. You can just put up the charger and tap into the electricity. Hydrogen is a bit different. You can't just say, okay, well, we've got this empty petrol tank here, let's pump the hydrogen into it's not going to work.
Yeah, we're a good couple of years out of that, and I get your point. And again, that's where, like I always said, Elon Musk made EV sexy. And suddenly the world embraced them and everyone wanted a Tesla. And now they're burning them in LA. But, then it was sexy. And suddenly what was very hard and expensive and this and that, he said no. And he did it and he made it happen. The one thing I need to state very clearly here is I've watched F1 and I've watched E1, and watching electric Formula E vehicles race is very boring because you don't have that roar, you don't have that motor pulling through and screaming past, and all you hear more is the wheels squeaking when they're driving around past each other.
I've watched a bit of it, and it is quite odd to watch. And yeah, I mean, it's the same as saying I don't want to buy an electric vehicle because I want to drive my 1975 or 1965 Mustang or whatever the case might be, or I don't want an electric motorbike because I want to drive my Harley. And there is that issue of the heart versus the head.
Again, if we look 150 years ago, people said that about horses and wagons, and that they loved riding their horse because of that. And why would they need one of these driven things that's a carrier without a horse? I mean, that's insane. How could you think? And that became normal. So again, I think they will become those prize collections that people will have in their homes or in their garages, which they'll like fill up, and of course under regulation. Then with emissions and that, take it for a drive, and then we'll see, like you see the old steam locomotives. If you ever see one and you show your kids that that's what our great grandparents rode, and they're like, wow. I think it'll be the same thing.
Pretty much, yeah, yeah. Your Ford Mustang is going to become the horse of today. In the sense of
Literally.
literally the horse of today. I mean, it's always funny how they said way back in the day, only the everybody had a horse and only the very rich could afford a car. And these days, it's everybody has a car and only the very rich can afford a horse.
And I can tell you, hands down, that is very true.
But yeah, I mean, basically what it boils down to is the demand for electric vehicles are growing significantly. Despite of what you feel about them, despite of what you think about them, the demand is growing. And with that, the demand for platinum, for silver, all of these precious metals is going through the roof. And we're still sitting at a deficit on the supply side. And I think that's one of the biggest things driving the price at the moment.
Yeah, and I think within that side, and you've nailed it, is I think the growth within that market is carrying those prices, is carrying silver, is definitely carrying platinum, and to a degree, rhodium. We've given the case for rhodium today, which is interesting. It's as you've mentioned, there's a lot of things. It's a far rarer, all those kind of things, but it still has its place. And again, this is where South Africa, if we get our act together, we could be leveraging off our resources and our infrastructure to actually create more growth.
Definitely. And one of the biggest use cases for rhodium and platinum in autocatalytic converters is, of course, in the heavy vehicle sector. Yeah. Your trucks, your long haul freights. And that's where we've still got the deficit on battery power. Hydrogen is an option there,
Yeah.
but batteries just aren't exactly suited for that because weight matters on those, and batteries are heavy. So you've got an option. Either you run a diesel engine or you're going to need a hydrogen fuel cell engine.
Or a very heavy battery truck.
Or an extremely heavy battery truck, which cuts down on what you can haul, which is
And
the
that's
last thing they want.
profitability, power to weight ratios, and that kind of knocks it out. So again, I mean that gives it definitely presents an opportunity. I think as you're mentioning and you're highlighting right now, is in with the family type sedans and small vehicles, that's kind of covered, and it's going to be very hard for a hydrogen fuel cell type vehicle to get into the market and dominate it. That said, these changes technologically have happened, even if we look at from VCRs to DVDs digital. I mean, those things do change. There's resistance, and sometimes say that, I'll never forget what the guy from Blockbuster said when they mentioned, that people will be able to download movies and things like that. And he said, "No, never happen," and they went bankrupt. So again, that's a demand on technology, and we know that the technological cycle is so fast right now. The turnover, and we've spoken of this at length with AI. It's actually, and the more I look into the AI thing, the more I just realize how fast it's learning. So what we used to see, grow turnover rates of 3 to 5 years, it's becoming 18 months. It's becoming a year. We look at how AI has probably supported the growth within these sectors from a design perspective, from all of those things where traditionally you'd need highly qualified people to actually be putting these vehicles together. Now suddenly you got this whole vast AI system that can help break things down. You design it, you then say, okay, I want to rationalize all certain parts of the car, so we create common things from a production perspective. Boom, it does it. So again, all of those things support growth and quicker growth far easier.
It does. I mean, it's the world, the economy, technology, everything is in a bit of a wild ride right now. I mean, could anybody ever have predicted that this is how fast it's going to be moving today? I don't know.
Well, I'm still waiting for Back to the Future to get to the point of us flying vehicles, and that's coming. There's already talk of that. Of course, the ground is getting too busy, so they're now looking at air type vehicles, and they are your drone type things, with four type propellers, and that model's also working. We look at AI assistants where you'll have like robots like RDD, 2D walking with you. That's coming. In fact, it's here already.
Definitely. I mean, some of the technology that's already here, that's already working, it might not be mainstream yet, but it's already there, and it's already to the point where, you know, it's fully functional, but it's just not entered the mainstream yet. And I think we're going to see some very, very interesting and strange things before the end of this decade.
Yeah, and as I said, we just over 5 years to that the end of this decade, and I think from a economic perspective, I think that we're not out of it, and I do think, and I still believe this, that there are big fundamental shifts and changes coming economically that are going to affect the average person. And again, that's why we always drive that message to through is control some of your wealth. And precious metals offers you that opportunity to still remain independent in a world that is absorbing you into it as the matrix, literally.
I agree 100% with you, Dion.
In closing, Willem, just if there's anything else that you'd like to say.
No, I think, as you said, hedging your wealth out of fiat currencies into something like precious metals is important right now. People might be looking at where the precious metals are sitting and saying, but they're so expensive, I'm waiting for the dip. You never know if there's going to be a dip, firstly. Secondly, um, by waiting, you might be losing out on future gains. You know, how do they say? If you're waiting for a better thing to come along each time, you're going to be waiting forever. And once again, don't just take what we say and suddenly throw all your money at something. Please, we are not financial advisors. Um, we just trying to make sense of what's happening, and just sort of give you the knowledge of what you need to look out for, what you need to know about the precious metals market and investing in it. Once again, do not do any investment activities without actually consulting a financial advisor. And if you do, do it in moderation.
Yeah, due diligence and as you say, diversify is key. And again, we are not financial advisors, and this is content to be used, and also always check your facts. Make sure before you make those decisions that you've actually done your homework on it.
100%. And with that, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you want to see some more, be sure to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next one.
Cheers. Thank you.